You might not realize it, but the world is already at war. Not with explosions, not with tanks, just quiet power plays and rising pressure behind the scenes, while your future hangs in the balance. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're revealing why you're witnessing the start of World War III and don't even know it. You don't hear any air raid sirens when you wake up. No one's told you to ration gas or line up for enlistment. Your street looks normal. The news seems depressingly normal, so it's easy to assume the world is normal. But take a closer look. Your grocery bill jumped again this week because a shipping lane thousands of miles away just became a war zone. The app you use every day suddenly goes dark in half a dozen countries, not because of a glitch, but because two superpowers are punishing each other with tech bans. And that unimportant headline about yet another drone strike? Well, it's connected to the last one you saw and the one before that. Analysts say we're watching multiple regional conflicts beginning to function like pieces of a single global confrontation. And if history is any tell, that slow grinding shift from peace to something far more malicious might be the start of another world war. The typical image of a world war is a gigantic no-holds-barred guns and tanks affair. Entire nations declare war, mobilizing millions as battles sprawl out across whole continents. But today the definition is far more slippery. And that matters, because what we mean by war might have already shifted. In the 20th century, the term World War referred to conflicts which most or all major powers of the time were drawn into. Fighting erupted across multiple countries and across land, sea, and air. But the gist of it is that those classic wars were also extremely visible. You could see the tanks rolling across the vast Eurasian steppes in newsreels. You heard about conscription in every corner. And you and everyone you knew were rationing food and rubber and metal. So the recurring themes are there: conflict between multiple great powers, or at least a single great power alliance fighting another, engagement across multiple regions and theaters, and the mobilization of national economies, societies, and armed forces in a way that shakes the very foundations of the global system. In today's era, the game seems to have changed. The battlefield has become both physical and functional. That means wars can start with tanks invading a city or with a series of flashpoints like cyberattacks, supply chain shocks, missile strikes, and sanctions. They all bubble up until the pot begins to boil over. Great powers may not even declare war, but that doesn't mean that they're not engaging in concerted conflicts across multiple domains. Economies may tout peacetime norms, but that doesn't mean that these tools aren't being weaponized. Through tightened trade flows, choke-pointed tech supply chains, contested shipping lanes, and more, society still takes the hit, even if there's no official front line. So if we stick to the idea that war is a major clash of state interests driven by national power and extending far beyond a raid or rebellion, then the stage is already set. If you really want to understand whether the world is drifting toward a major conflict, don't start by looking at battlefields. Look at budgets, because when nations prepare for something big, the first place it shows up is in the checkbook. Global military spending hit a record $2.72 trillion in 2024, a rise of 9.4% in a single year, the steepest jump since the Cold War, and the 10th year in a row that global defense budgets have climbed. More than 100 countries increased their military budgets, and many did so while reducing social or domestic spending. That is not normal behavior for a peaceful world. The biggest spenders are exactly the nations you would expect in a global power confrontation: the United States, China, Russia, Germany, and India. Together, they account for the vast majority of global military investment, and all five have increased spending to prepare for longer, more complex conflicts. Nowhere is this shift sharper than in Europe and the Middle East. Europe's military spending, including Russia, rose by 17%, pushing the continent to levels not seen since the Cold War. Last year alone, Russia's defense budget alone surged 38%, reaching 7.1% of its entire GDP, numbers associated with wartime mobilization. Ukraine, fighting for its survival, is spending a staggering 34% of its GDP on defense, one of the highest proportions in modern history. The Middle East is also rapidly rearming. Defense spending across the region has surged in response to escalating tensions. The combination of missile exchanges, proxy wars, and strategic choke points like the Red Sea has created a regional arms race unlike anything in decades. And we are all bound to feel the effects sometime or another. You see, when governments shift tens of billions into fighter jets, missile defense systems, and naval expansion, that money has to come from somewhere. If your government suddenly finds cash for new submarines, but it says there's no room in the budget for basic things like infrastructure, education, or healthcare, you're watching the civilian side of a slow-motion mobilization. All of this money is flowing toward the same three pressure points: Europe, the Middle East, and the Pacific. These are the places where the next chapters of the conflict may already be unfolding. If there is one place where World War III would plant its flag first, it's Eastern Europe. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has dragged on for years, and instead of slowing down, it's evolved into something far more dangerous. A grinding industrial slog dominated by the specter of drones and missiles. Russia is now producing drones on a scale that analysts once thought impossible, launching thousands per campaign. Ukraine fires back with its own drones, so many in fact that some military reports estimate up to 75% of battlefield losses on both sides now involve unmanned systems. Basically, that means a huge chunk of modern warfare is just guys in bunkers furiously piloting flying lawnmowers at each other. The old image of tanks rolling across Europe has been replaced with a sky full of buzzing, exploding GoPros. Ukraine's lucky it's not fighting alone, at least in the figurative sense. Though political priorities constantly shift, Ukraine remains supported by the largest industrial base in the world: the US, the European Union, the UK, and dozens of supporting states. They're all funneling weapons, training, ammunition, intelligence, and air defense systems to where they're needed the most. But another challenger is emerging. Beyond, and perhaps even behind Russia, a group some analysts now call the axis of upheaval is coming to the fore. This blooming partnership between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea has everyone watching. North Korea has shipped millions of artillery shells and rockets to Russia, so many that intelligence officials estimate Pyongyang had for some time been supplying 35 to 50% of Russia's artillery needs. North Korea is also believed to have transferred ballistic missiles and tens of thousands of soldiers to frontline support and logistics roles. Iran provides Russia with intel, drones, and other killing technologies. Russia pays back the favor with its own advanced missile systems, jets, and advanced weapon tech. China hasn't sent weapons directly, but it is quietly providing the critical stuff that keeps Russia's war machine alive. Things like machine tools, electronics, dual-use materials, and drones by the tens of thousands. This coalition, called CRINC for short, is not a formal alliance, but it is behaving like one, and alliances that act like alliances tend to create, well, opposing alliances. Here's where things feel even more like a proto-world war. Russia has been waging a hybrid war on NATO countries without firing a single bullet at them. Take the Baltic Sea region. GPS systems on commercial airliners have been jammed or spoofed dozens of times in the last year, forcing pilots to divert or rely on backup navigation. Flights suddenly lose their GPS over Estonia, Latvia, Finland, or Poland, all areas where Russia's electronic warfare units operate just across the border. European leaders have publicly accused Russia of interfering with aviation safety, and intelligence agencies warn that the jamming is deliberate and strategically timed. European officials have also repeatedly accused Russia of tampering with undersea cables, the fiber optic arteries that carry over 95% of the world's internet traffic and international communications. Several of those cables in the Baltic and North Seas have been mysteriously cut or damaged since 2022. Everyone is pointing the finger at Moscow. Everyone is furious, but Europe hasn't exactly been able to catch a submarine red-handed. Without a smoking gun, Europe can't formally blame Russia, so instead Western militaries quietly increase underseas patrols. NATO moves anti-submarine assets into the region, and the guise of normalcy continues. Meanwhile, Russian cyberattacks target everything from power grids to government networks to voting systems of NATO states. Again, nobody is officially at war, but everyone is sure acting like they're preparing for one. It feels eerily like the Balkan crisis of 1914, only it's not, it's bigger. If Ukraine is the land war shaping Europe's future, the Middle East is the region where every fuse seems to be lit at the same time. The Middle East has always been a powder keg, but in 2024-25 it started looking less like a keg and more like an entire aisle of fireworks with sparks flying in all directions. For decades, Iran and Israel fought in the shadows, waging hybrid warfare. Cyber attacks here, sabotage there, proxy battles across the region. Then 2024 blew that rule book to pieces. In April, Iran launched around 170 drones and missiles directly at Israel from Iranian soil. It was the first openly acknowledged attack of its kind, and it forced the US, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and several European militaries to help intercept the barrage. Then in 2025, after a series of Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear and missile sites, Iran fired over 100 drones and additional missiles back across the region. It was called a pseudo-declaration of war. In September 2024, Israel carried out an operation that planted explosives in pagers distributed to Hezbollah operatives. On 2 consecutive days in Lebanon and parts of Syria, thousands of those devices detonated simultaneously. The incident wounded thousands and killed dozens. The attacker was never officially named, but retired Israeli intelligence agents and major media reported that it was an operation by Mossad and the Israeli military. Europe, the US, and others watched and mulled over how the threshold of modern war came to include booby-trapped pagers, something nobody had on their bingo card. While rockets flew overhead, another battle is fought in total silence. Iranian-backed hackers hit Israeli water systems, hospitals, banks, and anything else that keeps the country running. Israel fires back with cyberattacks of its own, aiming to blind radars and shut down networks. These cyberattacks rarely stay contained. When ports, telecom hubs, and energy grids get hit, the shockwaves can spread on a continental scale. A power glitch in Haifa, for instance, can slow shipping in Rotterdam. Hacked servers in Tehran can delay deliveries in Chicago. You don't need to be in the Middle East, in other words, to feel the effects of this hybrid conflict. If Ukraine is the European chapter of a wider conflict, the Middle East is the chapter where every nation suddenly has something to lose. In the Pacific, we have another global hotspot that may spawn a full-blown war without ever firing a shot. Over the past few years, Taiwan has become ground zero for the modern version of creeping war. What we're seeing is not full-scale invasion yet, but a relentless campaign of pressure and coercion aimed at setting the conditions for future conflict. This is evident in several ways. China regularly deploys waves of aircraft into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ, sometimes sending dozens of jets at once to rattle the nerves and exhaust air defenses. In the sea, the so-called gray zone tactics take the form of fishing boats, Coast Guard vessels, and naval assets swarming disputed shoals and corridors. One recent report estimates that out of nearly 12,000 vessels in contested waters around Taiwan, 128 to 209 boats exhibited behavior consistent with gray zone operations. If that wasn't enough, the Pacific Front includes stealth operations you barely notice. Consider from time to time when your Netflix stream stutters and your online meeting freezes that somewhere potentially a submarine cable is being tapped or ransacked. Across the Pacific Rim, security alliances are re-rigging faster than we realize. On one side, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and its partners are moving anti-ship missiles and troops into the Philippine northern islands. This is creating a wall of firepower meant to block the Chinese Navy from the Western Pacific. It's the region's choke point strategy made real. Meanwhile, China is boosting its Navy, missiles, and so-called gray zone assets, readying not only to possibly invade Taiwan, but for war across the wider region. For all of us, this should signal that this remote island dispute is not so remote anymore. We can't stop buying devices made with chips from this region. Our cloud storage depends on cables and satellites routed through those same waters, which bears reasoning that in our everyday life we might soon see the cost of our new laptops skyrocket in price because shipments have to reroute around contested waters. You might see corporate emails saying that they're pausing service in the Indo-Pacific owing to ongoing geopolitical disruptions. Meanwhile, Chinese fighter jets continue to slice through Taiwanese airspace. Thanks to Russia, when a military today gears up for an overt invasion, the world braces. But when it engages slowly, changing supply routes, launching gray zone sweeps, and disrupting electronics and logistics, the war may already be underway. If Taiwan were hit hard, the consequences ripple to Japan, Australia, and other U.S. alliances. If undersea cables are severed and chip factories go offline, you don't need frontline boots to feel the shock. The Pacific is easily the quietest, most dangerous stage of the war we might already be living. The absence of dramatic headlines doesn't mean the absence of war. Want to know where else conflict is heating up? Look up. For decades, satellites were the quiet workhorses of modern life. But between 2023 and 2025, the veil dropped. The U.S. Space Force disclosed that several American satellites had experienced what officials called dazzling attempts, where ground-based lasers aim to blind or overheat optical sensors. China tested a co-orbital inspector vehicle capable of sidling up beside foreign satellites, behavior not all that dissimilar from a burglar testing the windows. Russia, meanwhile, expanded electronic jamming experiments designed to interfere with satellite navigation across entire regions. None of this makes front-page news, and none of it looks dramatic on the ground. But a handful of successful hits could knock out GPS across continents. It could seriously confuse air traffic control or even paralyze shipping lanes. Space is now the high ground of any military conflict, and it's becoming more and more contested by the week. So how do you know if you're living through the early chapters of World War III? It's not like you'll get an alert saying, "Breaking! World War III has entered the chat." Instead, you have to recognize the symptoms. Think about it again in logical terms. Multiple major powers are actively fighting proxy wars across 3 continents. Over 100 countries just raised military spending simultaneously, something that hasn't happened since the Cold War. Alliance systems are hardening into opposing blocs like it's 1914 all over again. Critical infrastructure's under constant cyber attack. Global supply chains are reorienting themselves into us versus them terms. Nuclear powers are directly striking each other's assets, Iran and Israel, for instance. Space is being weaponized and silently contested, and everyday items are suddenly exploding, expensive, or unavailable due to what news anchors politely call geopolitical tensions. Your government is discussing war economy measures while very carefully calling it something else. If even half of that sounds familiar, you're living through what historians might eventually call the opening phase of World War III. If all of it sounds familiar, you've been paying attention. Now here's another thing you probably don't need anyone to tell you. The world is catastrophically unprepared for the conflict it is sliding into, and that is what makes this moment so dangerous. Where the rubber really meets the road is in the realm of industrial capacity. Remember how Russia thought it would just roll through Ukraine in days? Instead, it is burning through artillery shells faster than it can produce them. The US, meanwhile, has struggled to ramp up its production of basic 155mm artillery shells. You know, the kind of unglamorous, unsexy weapon that actually wins wars. In 2022, the US was making about 14,000 artillery rounds per month. Russia was firing that many per day in Ukraine. American officials scrambled to increase production, aiming for 100,000 per month by late 2025. But even that pales in comparison to the millions of rounds fired in just the first year of the Ukraine conflict alone. So, if a major war were to break out tomorrow, Western militaries would likely run out of ammunition in weeks, not months. The industrial base that built 50,000 Sherman tanks during World War II is long gone. The West has spent 3 decades optimizing for efficiency and just-in-time delivery, and it turns out that doesn't work so well when the factories are in the land of your potential enemy and the shipping lanes are mined, or someone's cousin in logistics is currently hiding in a bunker. And it's not just the militaries that aren't ready, it's all of us. Most people in the West haven't experienced war since their great-grandparents' generation. We have zero cultural memory of rationing, blackouts, or cities under bombardment. When European officials recently floated the idea of stockpiling emergency supplies, the public response was basically, "LOL, okay, boomer." But here's what actual war preparation looks like in countries that take it seriously. Sweden, after abandoning 200 years of neutrality to join NATO, sent every household a 32-page booklet entitled, "If Crisis or War Comes." Finland, which shares an 830-mile border with Russia, never stopped teaching its citizens about wartime preparedness. The EU has been urging its citizens to keep 72 hours of emergency supplies at home at all times. A recent survey found that only 1 in 5 American households have a contingency plan for when things go south and emergency strikes. Many don't have enough food or water for even 3 days. While many major US cities have emergency plans, they often assume functioning supply chains, an assumption that falls apart the moment a conflict disrupts shipping and triggers panic buying. Remember the great toilet paper shortage of 2020? Now imagine that. But it is literally everything, and it's not about to end anytime soon. Brutal. Slow-motion disasters aren't inevitable until they suddenly are. World War I was preventable right up until overly rigid alliances and a failure of imagination set the dominoes falling. The difference this time, we have nuclear weapons, faster communication, and automated systems that could escalate before anyone has time to think. But we also have survived 45 years of Cold War standoffs through sheer luck and individual humans refusing bad orders. Could we survive unscathed again? The dominoes are wobbling, and only time will tell. If we really are witnessing the start of the next big conflict, what would America actually do? Watch US World War III plan to see how the US expects the conflict to unfold, or click on this video instead.